Welcome to The Straight Stitch, a podcast about sewing and other fiber arts. This is episode 131, and my name is Janet Szabo. I'll be your guide as we explore all things sewing. I don't really have any of my own personal sewing to talk about today. Usually around the middle of the summer, I get a break and things slow down enough that I can do a bit of sewing, but that hasn't happened yet. In any case, today's episode is an interview, and it might be a little longer than usual, so I don't feel the need to give you any updates on anything. So we're going to jump right in. My guest today is Kristen Buchanan, who is one of the co-founders, along with Hannah Paquette and Jolene Quaintance, and I hope I'm pronouncing their names correctly. These three ladies are the co-founders of Pacific Northwest Fiber Connect. I ran across a mention of Pacific Northwest Fiber Connect at the beginning of 2026. I did not realize that it truly was a fledgling organization. I reached out to Kristen about doing a podcast interview, and she was due to give birth, so we agreed to wait a while until she had recovered. And in the meantime, that fledgling organization has grown exponentially. So it's a bit outside the scope of sewing, perhaps, but it does have to do with fiber. And I think this organization has a bright future ahead of it. So without further ado, here is my interview with Kristen. Welcome to the podcast, Kristen. It's great to have you.
Thank you so much, Shannon. I'm so happy to be here.
Before we jump into more about the organization, I want to get a little background information about you personally. Are you a fiber artist yourself? Is that where this came from?
That's a great question. I shouldn't, but I always hesitate to call myself an artist, as I'm sure many people do. But I have been sewing since I was 6 or 7. My grandmother kind of started me on the journey, um, making doll clothes, all kinds of fun things like that. And then actually a family friend through our church really taught me how to sew garments when I was in middle school. And I kind of went crazy. And I also did not, I don't remember if it was that I didn't have the money, which is probably true, or that I just didn't care, but I used quilting cottons for everything. And so I, I still have some of those things, and they're not definitely not wearable. They're wearable for a seventh grader. But it's kind of fun to look back on those things. But throughout, my high school and I took a sewing machine with me to college, and then graduated college with a museum education and arts history degree, and spent a lot of time in the studio art program and a little bit away from fiber and textiles, and then moved across the country and did not have a lot of money. And so I started making my own clothes again, which I eventually found was sort of kind of the same thing as buying nice clothing, right? It can be expensive to buy the nice things that you want. And then fast forward to my early 30s, I had my first child, who is now 4.5, and I just felt like I couldn't read a sewing pattern anymore. My brain was just not screwed on properly. And I had actually just closed my technology startup. And so my brain was sort of swimming in a lot of different random things. And a friend of mine in my fiber guild encouraged me to go take a spinning class. And I was like, I don't think I just had never been drawn to that before. And had always had, learned to knit when I was in middle school, but had always admired fiber at festivals, but really never wanted to do anything with it. But then turns out I loved spinning. And then that led to a weaving class. And I loved weaving. And it kind of just kept going. And, pushing into the history of the organization a little bit, once I closed that business, I'm kind of an unemployable lifelong entrepreneur. And so I decided I need to work on something other than mothering. And so I started to think about the regional fiber economy. And there is an organization called Fibershed that was formed down in California a little over a decade ago that I was very influenced by and inspired by, in particular, Rebecca's um, concept of building a wardrobe in a year from her local region. And I wanted to be able to do that. I still have not done that right now because I'm focused on building an organization. But I started to write a business plan for that. And then one thing led to another, and I met my co-founders, and we actually changed the concept a little bit away from a fiber shed to a chamber of commerce. So that's a long way of saying, yes, I'm a fiber person. I find myself doing a lot more quilting these days, and I usually get about one or two garments a year. And I do spin quite a bit, but it's really spinning for the sake of spinning, not really for knitting or anything else.
When you say a chamber of commerce, can you maybe unpack that a little bit?
Absolutely. Yeah, so a chamber of commerce is a type of nonprofit. It is a 501(c)(6). Most of the time people think of nonprofits, they're 501(c)(3)s. And a 501(c)(6) is particularly designed to be an organization that represents a slice of an industry or a geography. So, for example, you might have a chamber of commerce in your local town, or your state might have one. And there are also chambers of commerce that represent particular industries. And so we are a little bit of both. We have chosen to represent the fiber and natural fibers, so wool, Angora, alpaca. Nobody really grows cotton here. There's a little bit of flax here, but in the Pacific Northwest. So that's Washington, Idaho, and Oregon. And the purpose of a chamber of commerce is really to identify what the needs of its members are and advocate for those needs. And that could be both on a business technical assistance level, so making sure that those businesses are more profitable, more successful, but also could be on a legislative advocacy level. So making sure that the things that are on the table at a local, regional, state, and national level are in favor for our members. And so we kind of try to pay attention to all of those things. So that's a little bit about a chamber is.
I lived in Pennsylvania for a while and was involved in the Maryland Sheep and Wool Festival. My sense is that a lot of the small producers don't have the resources to compete on the same playing field with the large producers. So, is that something that you're seeking to address?
Yeah, it really is. Something that is true probably for all of the fiber world, honestly, in our country, for lots of historical reasons that we probably don't have time to get into today. But it's definitely true in our region, is that a lot of these businesses, let's say an indie dyer, a small mill, even a producer, and when we use the term producer, we mean farmer or rancher who actually produces um, wool or fiber out of their farm. They're actually really small businesses. They're one or two people, usually, maybe less than 10, generally speaking. There are I would say almost certainly going to be under $1 million in revenue every year, minus a couple of the larger players for sure. And many of those businesses are run by people who still have part or full-time jobs. And I think we've noticed a couple of different challenges that they all face. And one of those is that there is a complicated supply and demand problem in this country around textiles and fiber in general. And it's very challenging for, let's say you're a fiber farmer, you're a sheep farmer, let's say Finn sheep, which are very cute little tiny sheep. And you've got 30 of those, and you want to take their wool and make great yarn. And let's say you even want to make it into blankets. So in order to do that, you not only need to have a shearer who will shear the sheep, then you need to have all of that wool scoured and cleaned. So you got to get all of the yucky stuff off of it. And there are actually industrial scour mills, but they're very rare in this country. There's probably only two of them that are even accepting new clients at this point. And they're mostly regional and they're not in our region. So once you get that clean, then you have to send it to an actual mill to be spun into yarn. And then you would want to have it woven either by hand or mechanically. And there are almost no mills in the country that will mechanically mill your yarn into anything at this point. This is, drastically different than how it was 40 years ago and definitely 100 years ago and even a little bit longer. And even though, um, you can still, there are actually a growing number of mills in our region right now. It's every year we're adding a few, and we have a little above 20 right now. Even though you have mills that you can access, a lot of them have 6 months to two wait lists. So you might be waiting in line to actually get the product that you sheared off a sheep 2 years ago, and then you have to go and market and sell it. So you have this sort of very long, convoluted, and complex process to get the product into a customer's hands. Not to mention, customers really struggled to understand the price point of regionally produced yarn, right? It's really much more expensive than something that comes out of India or China or Peru. And when you walk into your local yarn shop, that's what you're going to find. And I'm not saying that that yarn is not beautiful. It's not, some of it's very high quality. Um, However, some of it is produced in very questionable ways, and you have some questions you can ask about the environmental impact of both the farming and the dyeing, the labor, of course, that was used to make it. And so you have this, like I said, a very complicated economic system that a small producer, a small indie dyer, or a business really isn't equipped to deal with by themselves. And so a chamber of commerce has the ability to pull together everybody who's part of that. And PNWFC, so Pacific Northwest Fiber Connect, we have members who are shearers, we have members who are mills, dyers, producers who may, who have alpaca or wool, all people, all kinds of people along that supply chain. So by getting them together, that allows us to have those conversations, to make more connections, to smooth out some of the kinks in that very complicated economic system.
If it's not proprietary information, can you tell me how many members you currently have?
Yeah, I was actually looking this up last night. So right now we have, I think I saw 121 on our spreadsheet, and we just opened membership in late January. So the history briefly, the organization, we wrote our business plan in 2024, and then we spent all of 2025 working on the actual foundation of the organization. So I've built several businesses, and this is actually the second organization like this that I have founded. Um, I did a regular Chamber of Commerce in Portland, Oregon, many years ago. And through all of those experiences, I realized organizations that really don't start with a strong foundation will not last long. And so we spent almost a year doing that and getting our IRS certification to be a 501c6, all of that stuff ironed out, our website ironed out. We built this beautiful map that is free to anyone. You can see it on our website to see who are the producers, who are the teachers, artisans, all kinds of folks, yarn shops, even in our region. And so we spent all of the last year doing that. And then we finally opened up for membership earlier this year.
You are probably the best qualified person to have done this. And I hope that the producers and the members all realize what a gift that is.
I appreciate that a lot. I want to give a shout out though to I am joined by two co-founders. So Hannah Paquette and Jolene Quaintance, and it's kind of fascinating. We just sort of randomly met. I got a random invitation to go to a wool producers committee meeting. It's actually got a much longer name than that, but one of our current, like, our now board members, works for the Northwest Agricultural Business Center, and she was working on a project with Hannah in way back in 2024 around understanding what is the feasibility for us as a region to create an industrially sized, commercially sized scour and spinning and weaving and carding mill. So they did this big study, and then they ended up out of that producing a wool co-op. And really briefly, a wool co-op is how wool used to be sold. So it used to be that if you had sheep every year or twice a year, you would shear your sheep and you would sell these big bales of wool to a co-op, and the co-op would go and market and distribute that for you. And so it was a great way to get a better price for your wool. And basically, those have almost all disappeared in this country for a lot of different reasons. But Emily and Hannah were reinvigorating that, and now we have one. And so um, that's how we randomly met. And Hannah just knows basically everything about the industry. And I am sort of just a lover of fiber, but the business person. And Jolene actually runs a pelletizing mill, which is a really fascinating mill that doesn't make yarn. It makes wool pellets, which is a byproduct of the wool industry. So wool has a bunch of stuff on it that's not so fun in your yarn, of course. We call it vegetable matter. And it turns out that that is great for your garden. It's really good for, water retention, things like that, fertilizer. So that's what Jolene's mill makes. And so she knows all of the milling ecosystem in the Pacific Northwest. So we all bring really different expertise to the table. And it's been very cool over the last almost 2 years now to be kind of combining that constantly.
How big is your board?
We have 7 people on the board, and we're actually looking to add two more. We have two open roles.
Once a producer or a yarn shop or somebody becomes a member, you have a newsletter to keep everybody in the loop. Do you have meetings? Do you get people together face to face?
All wonderful questions. So we have a couple different things. So members all get, they don't have to do this, but they have an optional member onboarding call with me, and they get actually about 90 minutes throughout the year of technical coaching. So we can work on any particular issue that they're working on. Sometimes folks are working on, I need to scale up my business, or I need to solve this problem in my supply chain, or I need to become more profitable. How do we do that? And so we'll work on their business in that time. And so they have that benefit. Of course, like you said, we do have the newsletter. And we also basically do social media almost for our members. We don't run their own social media accounts, but we can take all of their content that they submit to us and then push it out through our network and get them more views, get them more in front of more people. And so that is something we do for folks. And then usually once or twice a month, we also have a business workshop. So that's a development workshop. So it could be, for example, this year we ran a business basics series that was like all our websites, social media, finance, business health audit. We also just did one on merchandising and booth design. Later this year, we're going to be having what I would call more of a like consumer focused series of events where we talk a little bit about why is something so expensive. So it's actually one of the events is titled "It Costs How Much," and it'll be a kind of a panel with yarn shop owners and fiber producers and actually mills, so that individuals who are the folks who are knitters or crocheters, they're buying this yarn, this product. You understand, why is this skein of yarn $40 when I could have bought a 19 or $20 yarn that looks kind of similar? And what is that really? What am I doing when I'm buying that? And what are the ripple effects out in the economy? So we have business technical assistants. There is an annual meeting, and we did that digitally this year. And we're hoping that maybe in the future we could do it in person. It just takes a lot of time and coordination and all of that. And then we have a couple of other benefits that connect members to each other using our map and our fiber resource directory.
And you were at Black Sheep Gathering a couple of weeks ago. You had a booth there because I
Yeah, go ahead.
I ducked out of the church conference I was at to go to Black Sheep.
Yeah, so we could not go to all. There's actually, I think Hannah did a count, and there's almost 20 different fiber festivals in
Wow.
the Pacific Northwest every year. There's a post on our social media somewhere about it a couple of months ago. Um, so we picked six that we would represent at this year. Black Sheep was one of them. And so yes, we do have a booth at some of those festivals, and we're just there to tell people about the organization. And I think it's really interesting. We are not the first organization in the region to have tried something like this. We are definitely the first one to have gone the Chamber of Commerce route, but there are other organizations that have unfortunately tried and failed or closed that have attempted to kind of pull the industry together. And so we have recognized that that really means that we need to build trust with people, that it's kind of confusing. It's like everybody else at a fiber festival is a business, right? They're trying to sell you something. And technically we're trying to sell you membership too. But what is the purpose of your membership, right? So a basic business membership is $100 a year currently. What does that get you? And what should that, do for you? And I've even had members who have done a member onboarding with me come back and say that just paid for the membership. And that's what I want to hear, right? I want to hear that we are actually solving problems for our members. And the best way for us to do that is to get out in front of folks at fire festivals, to be honest.
Have you done, I know that you said that advocacy is one of your goals. Have you started any advocacy programs or
I
where is
wouldn't call
that
it
going?
programs just yet, but what we do is we kind of pay attention to different bills, different ballot measures in our states, and we've done a couple of different letters to representatives and governors on behalf of our members. And so, if we find that there's kind of an issue that we think is relevant, then we'll draft a document, a letter, and share that out with our members. So members can use that to send to their representatives if they want to, or as a talking point if they want to give a call to their representative. And then we also send it as an organization. And I think in the future, in a perfect, what I call well-funded world, we would have a person on staff who just manages legislative advocacy because there's actually so much going on. And not only, do you need to be reactive to what is already on the table, but we would want to be proactive. In fact, there are really interesting pieces of legislation that have come up through the country. Um, and we could be creating that for our states, right? We could be putting something forth to advocate, first instead of reacting to what shows up.
Let's talk a little bit about some of the organization's other goals.
We could talk a little bit about goals, because actually our well, I say it like every year, but we're so new that we've only done it one time. But we did do a founder strategic retreat this past year in 2025, and what we decided to do is kind of have a mid-year version that happens in the summertime and our end of year because we realized that things are happening so fast. To be honest with you, we were sort of blown away by how quickly people signed up for memberships. And I hope that that sounds humble and not vain, because we kind of thought that it was going to take the whole year to get to this number. And so this feels really good for us. But what that has meant is that we're getting a lot of asks and a lot of questions and things that people want us to do and funding opportunities to respond to. And we're actually only three moms who don't even work full time. We're not paid, you know. Um, and not to say that, that's not a big thing, but just so everybody knows, this is currently still kind of a volunteer run organization, and we work really hard to spend our members' money really wisely on programming and making sure that we are finding the resources. And right now, most of it is, like covering tech expenses, right, to keep the website running and the map running and things like that. So upcoming at our mid-year strategic retreat, we're going to be talking about some research that we've done. And we just have completed a really cool research project around yarn shops and the challenges and opportunities that yarn shops in the region are facing and what kinds of programming would help them and potentially partnering with other organizations. For example, there is the Craft Industry Alliance, there's the National Needle Arts Association. Those two organizations and others have great programming already. And so for us as founders, we don't want to reinvent the wheel. We want to be able to point our members in the right direction of things that may already exist, so that we use our resources most wisely. So that's something that we're going to be talking about. And on the docket next year, we probably are going to focus on some business programming specifically for mills and yarn shops, and then a little bit more consumer education. And I know that one project that's on our kind of horizon over the next couple of years is really working on a regional wool brand. If you know, maybe you've heard of Harris Tweed out of Scotland. That's a regional brand that represents many parts of that particular industry. And we'd like to build something like that for the Pacific Northwest. So those are some things that are on the horizon.
Are there a lot of sheep farmers in Washington, Oregon, and Idaho?
Well, a lot is an
Yeah,
interesting
I know.
but It's funny. It's actually really hard to tell you a real number. I can't really tell you there's, 500 or 1,000. But what we do know is that there are several hundred who have small flocks of say under 50 or so. And that there are also, probably close to 100, if not a little bit more, of folks who have flocks of 1,000 or more. So when you're thinking about commercial production, interestingly, in this country, for example, if our co-founder Hannah got that chance to go to the American Lamb Summit last year, which is um, not where you talk about fuzzy cute lambs, it's where you talk about meat, um, which is a byproduct, right? It's important for us to kind of think about this as a circular and sustainable
Sure.
industry. So there's fiber on one side and lamb on the other. But curiously, some of those producers, and some of them are in Washington, Idaho, Oregon, many of them are more in the Midwest and closer to you in Montana. Um, they are actually not raising those flocks for dual purpose. They're more raising them for meat, and then that wool gets discarded. And part of the reason that it's getting discarded kind of brings us to that earlier part of the conversation about the lack of infrastructure, because it costs so much just to ship that wool to one of the larger facilities in the country to be processed. It's just not worth it. And so we're really looking at over the next 5 to 10 years, how can we as an organization stimulate that economic growth that would drive more mills to be created, drive more, say, industrial scour mills, right? All the pieces of the chain that you need, especially when you have players like Pendleton, for example, that used to have a really big milling presence here and have significantly diminished that presence. So, looking at how can we bring some of that back? How can we start new businesses? And that's kind of our role as a chamber, is trying to build the capacity in the region to do that.
I have a friend here. She's not here at the moment. She's overseas, but she and her husband, when he retired, he's a physician. They both retired, and he wanted a kind of a new career. They bought a woolen mill from somebody in Utah, and I don't think I'm spilling any beans here. And it turned out that their lives went in a slightly different direction, so they had to shut down their plans for the woolen mill. But I remember them trying to get it up and running, and it just seemed like such a huge learning curve with not a lot of resources available. Are you going to be in a position, or are you in a position where if somebody comes to you and says, "Hey, I want to start a woolen mill, what do I
How do
do
you do that?
first?"
Yeah, that is such a common story. There's sort of a couple of things in there. So maybe I'll answer your actual question first, which is that we actually have three pillars of operation in our organization, and they're sort of the guiding lights of the organization. So our first one is about connecting the ecosystem. So kind of being a switchboard, like you need to connect with this person, this organization needs to connect with that person. The second one really is around business development, and we talked a lot about that. And the third one is almost exactly what you're talking about. It's what I would call trade education. And we have not had the capacity to really build on that this year, but it is in our next couple of year plan. And we're thinking about everything from having, if you walked up to any high schooler in the country today and asked them, do you think you want to work at a wool mill? They would be like completely confused. Like, what even is that?
Right.
What is wool, first of all? Um, and so, which is so sad to me, right? But that's for another conversation. But we want actually to change that you would have the opportunity, maybe through 4-H, maybe through an ag club at your school, a shop class, although many of those are gone now, but even something extracurricular where you could get some of this expertise. And we also would be working with, and we have kind of plans that we haven't started on them yet, but there are really only two manufacturers on this continent of mills. There's Belfast Mini Mills, and then there's Brother Mills. And Brother is out of Oregon, actually, and Belfast out of Canada. And they have like two or three technicians in their whole company. And so those guys actually are traveling all over the place, all over the country, helping people fix a problem. And sometimes these wool mill, and there's all kinds of, when people say, I purchased a mill, that could mean a lot of different things because there's spinning equipment, carding equipment, all kinds of different machines. Some of it is over 100 years old, some of it's brand new. Some of it you can't even get parts for anymore. And so there's actually a lot of mechanical knowledge that is lost about how to run these types of machines. And so I would love for us, this feels like a big grant project to me. I would love for us to be able to have some funding to really focus on that and to build some education. In my previous life, I was a learning designer, and so I have some expertise in pulling information out of subject matter experts and working with other learning designers to do that. And so we would love to be able to kind of, I would say, amplify and multiply the expertise of those millwrights, if you want to call them that, so that other people in Utah or Montana or elsewhere have something online that they could reference, right? Because that doesn't exist right now. And frankly, what we see a lot of the time is exactly the story that you shared. So people are interested in this, they use a 401k or they buy something after they retire, which means that they probably have maybe 10 years where they want to actually work on it because working in a wool mill is a very physically demanding job. It's not simple like pushing a couple of buttons, right? It's extremely physically demanding. There's a lot of health and safety concerns that will be just fine if you manage your operation well, but you have to manage it well. And so you really need a mentor and you need people to help you with that. And then you also need a succession plan. And so we're looking at, this is another programming area for next year, looking at how do we connect the dots between a younger person who wants to do this type of work, but may not have the funds. Because when you're looking at buying a mill, that could be, I would say, minimum $100,000 investment, right? Sometimes upwards of 500,000, depending on what type of equipment you're going to buy and in what condition. Um, and your person in your 20s or 30s is not going to have that for the most part. And so, but then when we see somebody who retired already and then they're closing their mill after 5 or 10 years of operation and they don't have anybody that they can sell it to, then it just closes, right? And then that equipment sits in a barn somewhere or sits in a warehouse somewhere and is sort of dying on the vine. And that's such a sad story to us. So we want to be kind of connecting the dots, helping with succession planning, helping with education. So that's definitely on our radar.
I just want to say that when I found out about Pacific Northwest Fiber Connect, it was at the beginning of the year. And like you, I was kind of blown away by all of a sudden it seemed to be this huge organization. And I'm sure that it's volunteer, I get that. But you have done a great job of managing the growth so far. And so I my sense is that you will continue to be able to manage the growth.
Well, thank you. That's such a kind compliment. And it's funny, when we founded the organization, like I mentioned briefly, we're all three of us are mothers, and I happen to have the youngest kids. I have a 4-year old, 4.5, a 2.5, and a 4-month old. It's very fun, except for when you're all sick, which we are. Um, but when we founded the organization, I knew that I wanted to have more kids, and Hannah and Jolene are, their families are built, and their kids are a little bit older than mine. But we kind of came up with this concept of working at the speed of motherhood, because while Hannah and Jolene have not worked in the kind of corporate space that I've worked in, I had a long time of working with venture capitalists and very technical software engineering companies, and there's extremely heavy and not very friendly, I would say, expectations for how you should perform and how quickly you should perform. And I was very upfront with Hannah and Jolene and said, I can't do that. I want to build this organization and I think it needs to exist in the world. And also, there was a time in my life where I would have gone like super hard and like this would be my full-time gig. And also this is not that time. And so that's why we're sort of blown away that we have been able to do this on the I would call the margin hours. And what that I think speaks to is that if you are really convinced that something does have to exist in the world, then you're going to get very clear about your goals. And then you're also going to get very clear about what you say no to. And I mentioned we are getting a lot of asks and a lot of, can you do this? Will you do that? And we have to say no to a lot of them. And that's really hard to do, actually, because there's a lot of good ideas out there. There's a lot of things that really should exist in the world. And also, it takes, human power to make those things happen. And so I think, I hope to say that I hope we will be successful over time in reaching these goals and doing these projects because we're committed to kind of managing it in a sustainable way rather than in a burnout kind of way. Because I think that's also something that has happened for some of the other organizations that have tried to work on these types of topics. So, briefly, something I'll add to the end of that is that one of the things that we had in our vision is very similar. So you said that you were familiar with FiberShed, and FiberShed used to have well, they still do have an affiliate program. I don't think they're accepting new affiliates right now. And there's one in Montana, there's one in, there's many all over the country that are very active. And we would like to not so much have an affiliate program, but we'd like to be able to basically offer up, in tech, we would call it open source, the blueprint of how to create a regional chamber of commerce for your fiber industry so that other organizations can come up and do this work in their region, right? We constantly are having people from California ask, can we join? Can we do this? And that's such a hard thing to have to say no to because it's at the end of the day, we don't represent California, right? We don't have resources to go down there and do some of the work that we would be able to do here in our region. And honestly, it's even a stretch to get to certain parts of Idaho or Washington or Oregon because they're huge states, right? And so what we'd like to see over time is actually we want to get smaller because we want to see other organizations filling in the space to get the hyper local set of organizations that can really identify the needs of their community and that those organizations are connected at kind of the parent level. So that's probably 5 to 10 years in the future, but that's something we'd like to be able to offer to the world.
I think that's a beautiful way to put it, the speed of motherhood. Mothers have gotten a lot accomplished over the centuries.
Probably quite the understatement. In a perfect world, if your nonprofit is actually doing the work that it was supposed to do, eventually cease to exist. And people don't really like to hear that, right? That if you were successful, and that is very aspirational, right? But if we could be really successful in that, what would that look like? Would we need to exist? Or would the businesses or the organizations that we represent be strong enough and capable enough? And in some cases, you always want some connective tissue. I think chambers of commerce are kind of an example of connective tissue, but then there are other types of nonprofits that probably should have closed their doors because their mission had to change because they actually reached their first mission. And that gets into sort of more complicated organizational dynamics. But I think at the heart of it, we have to be asking ourselves constantly the questions of, is this work that we're doing actually going to further the goals that we have for our members? And that's kind of a very simple and beautiful, easy litmus test for us when we think about our priorities, that our members are those millers and shearers and dyers and crochet designers and authors and instructors and just all of the amazing people along the natural fiber chain, if you will. And we want to make sure that we're actually doing the work that supports them.
How can people support you and how can they learn about you? And
Yeah, thank you for asking. So you can us at Pacific Northwest Fiber Connect. It's pnwfiberconnect.org. And we do have a number of free resources. So if you're in the region and you are curious about what's happening, we have a free community calendar and you can actually submit your own events to that too. So let's say you have a guild, you can put guild events on there. It's free to use and you can see what's happening all over the region. We also have a free fiber map, and so you can toggle on and off if you want to find producers. You can find all the farms there. And we actually represent both our members and non-members on that map. And by the end of the summer, we'll be come out with a fiber resource directory. And so that's for organizations and resources that are not mappable, so that don't have an actual address. And so that will also be free for the public. So anybody can use those things, and actually just using them is supportive of us, because if you use them and you like them and you tell other people about them, that's really helpful for us, because it builds our web traffic, and that helps people find us. One of the funny things when we started out, we kind of struggled with the word fiber because it actually means like fiber internet. And so our SEO was really struggling. So you would type in PNW Fiber Connect and it was like, do you want, you know, fiber optic cables? And so, no, that's not what we want. So that's really helpful just to use those things. We do have a buy me a coffee. So if you feel so compelled, and you're, in the region or not in the region, you can donate a little bit to us. Unfortunately, I should say it's not tax deductible because we're not a 501(c)(3), but it's very well appreciated. And you can also become a member. So we have individual memberships, and those are $10 a year. So it's like a couple of coffees. And as an individual member, you get a special newsletter. You get a lot of connection to farmers. Later this year, we're going to be having that event I mentioned earlier, where you're going to actually get to meet people that make the yarn that you could use for your next sweater or your next project, which I think is pretty cool as a maker. And you could also, if you are so inclined, be a business member or a community member. So that's for guilds and other nonprofits and schools. Um, and I think probably, I would say to anybody list who is a maker, the most supportive thing that you could do is actually shop from our members. And so you can go back to our holiday gift guide from last year. We'll obviously be producing one, even though I guess it's Christmas in July, but we'll be producing one in the fall for this December. So we do a holiday gift guide of all of our members who have things available for sale. Ultimately, we don't really want your money. We want you to spend your money at our members. So that would be the best thing. We are on Facebook and Instagram at Pacific North Fiber Connect.
Okay, and I will make sure that I put those in the show notes. Is there anything that we haven't talked about that you want to highlight?
I feel like I could talk about fiber for such a long time, but I think one of the things that I would love to highlight as a spinner personally, when I learned to spin, you don't really know what you don't know, right? And there's something really, if you're at a fiber festival, there's something really alluring about those beautiful, like brightly colored braids of roving. And most often, because it's a very popular fiber right now, and for other geopolitical reasons, there's a lot of merino on the market. But I would really encourage you, if you're a spinner, or even, to find actually already milled yarn, if you're a knit crocheter, of different breeds. I would encourage you to try to branch out, try new breeds. Like I mentioned Finn earlier, there's Gotland, there's Romney, there's so many, I mean, hundreds, which leads me to kind of our next thing that I forgot to mention. We actually do have a breed study course available to the public for what I think is a nominal fee. And so you can actually go and learn about over 130 different breeds of sheep. And our member Lois Oland and I put that together. So there's a lot of really cool opportunities to just try something new, which I think is one of the beautiful ends of being a member, is that you get to learn about these breeds of sheep, or other fiber animals that maybe you've never tried before.
I learned to spin. We may go off on a little tangent here. I learned to spin in the early 90s. You may not have even been born yet when I learned to spin.
Well, let's say I was born in October of 90, so it depends when you learned.
And I don't do it anymore. I still have all of my supplies. It seemed to me that when I was learning how to spin, spinning was kind of the in thing to do. And then over the last maybe 15 or 20 years, it sort of fell out of favor. And now it seems to be, everything is cyclical. And now spinning seems to kind of be coming up on the upswing again. So,
I think it is. I think, sometimes I try to convince myself to get on TikTok, and I have not been able to successfully convince myself of that. But I am learning because I also run my local fiber guild. And I'm learning that because we're getting new members who are, it used to be that I was the youngest member. And then one member came in who was like, she's got to be 25. She's got to be younger than me. And then another one and another one. And I would ask them like, okay, well, first of all, I mean, how'd you find our, website and all of that? Because we don't have a SEO, all of that. And they would say, well, I saw this video about spinning on TikTok, or I learned to drop spindle from somebody on TikTok. And so I think that there's really an interesting sort of subculture on the internet of crafting. And I think it's really bringing back a lot of interesting crafts. I'm seeing people dive into like foundation paper piecing and English paper piecing and all of these kind of and cross stitch and
Tatting.
like hobbies that you tatting, null binding. There's some fascinating sort of what I might call random, although probably the crafter who loves that wouldn't call it random. Um, you know, like I have vowed to never touch needle arts. I'm not a needle arts person. But there are people coming looking for community and looking for um, supplies, especially with the Joanne closure, which is a whole different ball game, right? A whole different conversation. Um, and I think we should be there for them, right? That there can be, teachers of all stripes, teachers who, can reach younger audiences. And yes, things are cyclical, but I think there's an interesting internet subculture going on that I don't really know about because I'm not really on that part of the internet.
I have one more question and then we'll wrap this up. And this is way out of left field. You mentioned that you have flax producers. Do you have any hemp producers?
I have heard some rumors that there are a couple of small farms that are producing hemp. There was a couple of pardon me, a couple of companies out of Eugene many years ago that I don't think are functional anymore. So I think there are some small scale producers that we don't have any as members, I should say right now. And the big flax project is Willamette flax, and so Willamette linen, I think it's called now. And I don't know where they are in their production cycle. I think they've been spending the last few years experimenting with different types of flax seeds and what would grow well. And fascinatingly, I didn't really know this when I moved to the region back in 2013, but the Willamette Valley in Oregon actually used to be a huge flax growing area. And when, you know, industrial things change, geopolitical things changed in the 80s and the 90s, that kind of died out. And now most of the time, if you get linen, it's going to be from Europe. Um, so I think the Willamette Flax folks are trying to change that right now.
Good.
I think so too. I think it would be, I actually ordered, I want to say it was at Oregon Flock and Fiber. I bought a half-pound bag of flaxseed from Golden State Flax, which is a similar flax project down in California. And I just have not found a place on my property yet to grow it, but it's so cool to grow your own flax. But obviously, that's not how I want to clothe myself constantly. You want to have somebody else do that for you.
Exactly. Having to, I mean, when you think about how much time was spent raising the animals, shearing them, preparing the fleeces, spinning them, weaving the fabric, clothes were not treated the way that they are now.
Absolutely. I could probably talk about that for a long time and won't, but I think somebody once asked me, and maybe we can wrap up on this, but somebody once asked me, if I buy this regionally produced, regionally dyed, and because there's so many different levels, right? You could be this was farmed here, but milled somewhere else and dyed somewhere else. You could be everything too, right? And that will certainly increase the price, I think. She asked me, well, if I choose that, then I can only make like a couple of things a year. And I sort of tried to reflect back that I think that we have to decide what our own personal values are, both around our making and our consumption, right? And recognizing that, we are in a system. We're not, if I go out and buy a yard of fabric, it's not just me buying a yard of fabric, right? It's me touching a whole set of producers and companies and dyers and people that I will never meet across the world. And it will have impacts that are sometimes positive and sometimes negative, right? And the same is true for yarn or any other craft product. And it's not to say that you shouldn't go out and buy fabric or you shouldn't go out and buy yarn if you don't know the producer. That's not at all true. But I think we do want to craft a set of values for ourselves about how we are consuming these goods and then how we treat them, right? If something did cost you more money to make, then maybe you will love it more. Maybe you will mend it. You'll learn to do that process, because you want to value that higher than you might otherwise with, say, a $5 Target t-shirt. And I think it's a valuable exercise to teach ourselves to look at some of the harder truths of our consumption, especially in the fiber and textile world.
Maybe that can be a future podcast episode.
That would be a fun conversation. Yeah.
Okay. We'll wrap it up there. Thank you. I appreciate it.
Janet, thank you so much.
I know that was one of my longer interviews, and it's a little bit outside the scope of sewing, but still fiber related. I hope you will check out Pacific Northwest Fiber Connect. Their map is a great resource if you're traveling through that area. And becoming an individual member at $10 a year is an easy thing to do, so I would encourage you to check them out. I love getting feedback. You can send email to me at janet@janetzabo.com. You can leave ratings and reviews on Apple Podcasts and Spotify, and you can use the fan mail feature. I will tell you, though, that if you use the fan mail feature, my replies are limited to 160 characters. So if you have a question or something where you want me to give you an in-depth response, email is the way to go. I can't do it through fan mail. You can find me at my website, www.janetzabo.com, with links to my Big Sky Knitting Designs website and to my blog, which is where I post pictures and talk about life here in Montana. A lot of that also makes it onto the podcast Instagram page at Straight Stitch Podcast. Those are the best places to find me. I hope that you're having a great summer, and until the next episode, I hope you get to go sew something.